And thanks so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather, 6th day of December 2021. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with National Weather Service, hosting today's show. First graphic up, we've got showing a graph of actually the Fairbanks location there, and showing, let's see, this was a rise from 8 a.m. Saturday to 8 a.m. Monday, and quite a rise in temperatures, and this is pretty much the case across all of interior Alaska, maybe to a lesser extent in the eastern interior, but everywhere from the North Gulf Coast, Bristol Bay, on up to the Arctic coast had a big increase in temperatures here the last couple of days, especially the last 24, 36 hours. 62-degree difference from that minus 37 Saturday morning to 25 this morning. Actually, take a closer look at the high temperatures at mid-afternoon around the state, starting off at, let's see, let me get going here. There we go. 37 degrees in Anchorage, high temperature so far today. Probably will be the high. Could reach 38 maybe when it's all, before it starts cooling off again. But that's the warmest temperature. First time we've been above freezing in Anchorage since, well, for a month, since November 6th was the last time we were above 32 degrees, and actually had a high of 34 on November 6th. And that's the warmest temperature since November 5th when we had 37 degrees. Then off to the west there, 38 at Stony. That must felt like shirt sleeve weather compared to the temperatures we've had for the last month that were far below zero. And even Nikolai McGrath up into the mid to upper 30s there. Nikolai 37, McGrath 36. But kind of a variation, as you can see, especially off to the east and northeast, depending on where the wind was blowing and where not so much wind was blowing there, with temperatures only in the upper teens. And then you can see just on the other side of the Alaska Range, still below zero at mid-afternoon today, at least for the high temperatures. And moving up, taking a look up north, and see Fairbanks, 28 degrees. So add that, that's actually, let's see, 65 degree temperature rise, or 66 anyway, pushing 30 there in the central Tanana Valley. But up to the north there, you can see still below zero at the same time, still off to the east too, below zero. And let's see, Arctic Village right at zero. And then notice the 34 degrees at Buckland, above freezing, pushing quite far to the north, and that's, I believe, Kiana there with 32 degrees. And then actually up on the eastern Arctic coast, that Alpine airstrip, 30 degrees, and Camden Bay at 35 degrees above zero. So quite a warm up all the way up to the Arctic coast. Coast, that intense storm pulling northeastward. They're sitting off the western Arctic coast currently and weakening. And moving on, off to the southeast there, early December snowstorm expected. These are the snowfall amounts expected here, well, Monday and into Tuesday, through Tuesday. Yakutat could pick up 12 to 18 inches, and Juneau 4 to 8 inches in the forecast. Otherwise, moving on down up north, Haines 3 to 7 inches. Most everywhere else on here, down to Wrangell 3 to 7 inches. Hyder 8 to 12 inches there. Second to Yakutat's 12 to 18 inches, and that's going on now, and expected to continue tonight and through or into Tuesday morning. And then also Cook Inlet, didn't get much snow here. Northern Cook Inlet, Anchorage up to Palmer, due to the Chinook type wind flow we had that brought the temperatures up, and downsloping, all the snow and precipitation got hung up in the mountains there, but expect some snow to come in with this next system coming in, 2 to 4 inches for the valley or more, 4 to 6 inches for the Anchorage area, and then higher amounts likely for the hillside, maybe up to 8 inches or so, and for also for Eagle River. And that's again tonight through early Tuesday afternoon. And moving on to the hazardous weather graphics, kind of a mess of colors here. Looks like somebody took a paintball gun and went to work on it. We got winter weather advisory western Arctic coast, winter weather advisory, eastern North Slope, winter storm warning or blizzard warning there for the southeastern Brooks Range into the Koyukuk Valley, Kobuk Valley down to Galena, coastal flood warning out until midnight, I believe, for the St. Lawrence Island area and the Bering Strait coast, as well as the Yukon Delta coast. Had some flooding going on there. But winds have really dropped off. I think they're only 25 miles an hour at Gamble or Savunga this afternoon, really dropping down on those winds. Coastal flood advisory for the northwest coast there, Kivalina up to Point Hope. But again, those winds really have dropped off from what they were. That low weakening pulling off to the northeast with the stronger wind shifting inland. Winter weather advisories out for the next system, Bristol Bay. Winter storm warning continues. Susitna Valley picked up anywhere from 10 to 24 inches, especially as you get up the Parks Highway there, north of Willow toward Trapper Creek, Talkeetna, Squentna, and those areas, especially the west-northwest part of the area there. High wind warning, eastern Alaska range, gusts 70 miles an hour still out. Kenai Peninsula, winter storm warning, heavy snow expected there, as well as the North Gulf Coast. And as I mentioned, Yakutat, and the winter storm warning for the greater Juneau area. We already saw those amounts all the way down to Hyder there for the winter weather advisories for snow. And moving on, satellite imagery showing all the clouds from that big storm circulation there. You can see sliding up along the western Arctic coast there and weakening. And you can see the Brooks Range. It looked like it was one bumpy ride flying into the Arctic coast or North Slope today. You can see the downslope notch with those strong southerly winds blowing across the Brooks Range up there. And then kind of rising air again, and you get the white, it's kind of pattern that causes standing lenticular clouds, is what I'm trying to say. Then down to the south, you can see the next system moving along the Alaska Peninsula up toward Shelikof Strait. Not too often you get lows tracking right up Shelikof Strait there. This one may or may not, may be more back toward the Aleutian Range. But anyway, you can see the next mass of moisture pushing up into the eastern North Gulf Coast. And moisture out to the west there, kind of a general area of snow showers covering much interior Alaska, heaviest on the upslope areas. Cold air coming southeastward again over the Bering Sea, spreading snow showers into the Pribilofs, down to the eastern Aleutians. Snowfall levels coming back down to sea level there. And much better conditions, northern Bering Sea. Winds have come down considerably there, St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula up to the northwest coast. And on the chart, let's see, one more loop here. Then going to the chart, that low again, 980 millibars, up from the 950 millibars it was yesterday when it was along the Russian coast. And the next system already pulling up there again, looks like over the Aleutian Range coming up into Bristol Bay. And that's what's going to bring the snow into southern Alaska tonight. An increase in winds once again, kind of still that gradient, keeping the temperatures in the upper 30s there on the lee side of the Chugach Mountains and into the Matanuska Valley there. And Copper River Basin, strong winds today. Gulkana, 40 to 50 mile an hour winds there up along the Copper River Valley and Delta Junction as well. Still a high wind warning out tonight for the eastern Alaska Range. And for tonight, we'll see the low shifts eastward there. And the gradient really starts to slacken off over the Alaska Range there. And really very slack gradient over all of interior Alaska now. Still a little breezy there up along the western Arctic coast down to Cape Lisburne, Point Hope. Still some blowing snow will be going on there, but conditions improving considerably. And especially with the coastal flooding and coastal flood advisories that are out, with the winds becoming more west or northwest and much lighter there. That should end that situation. Snowfall levels back down to sea level there, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Next system pushing another round of warm air into the southwest Bering and Aleutians. We'll see tomorrow that whole frontal boundary kind of breaks up into a trough there. And the precipitation, not all that impressive with it, as that low center moves to just south of the Russian coast. Weak high pressure there behind the flow in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's going to trigger another round of strong northwest winds for Kodiak Island. Storm force winds into the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay tomorrow, and gale force winds in Cook Inlet in the forecast for tomorrow, with snow ending from southwest to northeast or from west to east there. Area snow over the central interior, and the front brings precipitation into the panhandle of some type tomorrow, and that'll continue into Wednesday. West-southwest flow keeps a wet weather pattern going for the panhandle. Next system brings snow into the southwest interior, and the next system brings gale force winds into the central Aleutians with another push of warm air into the southern Bering Sea. Lows tonight, 20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle, teens and 20s, southern Alaska, coldest Bristol Bay into the Matanuska Valley, near freezing for Kodiak, highs mid-teens, Copper River Basin, 20s, south central Alaska, to near 32 for Homer, Seldovia, and Kodiak, in the 30s for the Panhandle, lower 20s, Bristol Bay, mid to upper teens for the Kuskokwim Valley, back below zero for McGrath on Wednesday morning, the Copper River Basin, single numbers, south central Alaska, mid-20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle, highs near zero for the Copper River Basin, and up north, staying above zero for the most part tonight, and highs in the teens tomorrow.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to first line weather graphic, we've got VFR, North Slope, Arctic Coast due to southerly flow, down sloping off the Brooks Range, marginal VFR for the Brooks Range with IFR there, west central interior across the Yukon River, down into maybe northern Kuskokwim Valley to the slopes of the Alaska Range. Some more IFR over the Yukon Flats. VFR though, upper Tanana Valley, 40 Mile Country into the northeast Copper River Basin. IFR, northern Cook Inlet, Matanuska, Susitna Valley, most of the Kenai Peninsula eastward across northern two-thirds of the Panhandle. Good VFR from Adak, Atka up across St. Paul into central eastern Norton Sound, Norton Bay, southward, all of the southwest interior, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, VFR. IFR, shimmy in at 2. Outlook for the afternoon, or the forecast for the afternoon. IFR, kind of some banding there coming in towards Nunivak Island, but north of the Pribilofs, otherwise marginal VFR for the Aleutian Chain, Alaska Peninsula, and that pushes in along the southwest coast, St. Lawrence Island. VFR, central, southwest interior to northeast Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island stays VFR. IFR, northern Cook Inlet, northward across Susitna Valley, Matanuska Valley into the western Copper River Basin, cutting across Nanana, Delta Junction, Fairbanks, Chena, all the way up to, say, right around Eagle northward to the southern slopes of the Brooks Range. Some IFR scattered around the north slope, along with some scattered VFR and marginal VFR. A little more solid IFR over the northwest coast, Noatak Valley, DeLong Mountains, and marginal VFR and IFR, eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And for Wednesday, another push of IFR comes into the southwest coast, Bristol Bay, northward there to St. Lawrence Island, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and IFR along the Aleutians and southward, becoming VFR behind the front there for the Pribilofs and shimmy in at 2. And then a band of IFR along and south of the Brooks Range to the western Arctic coast. Areas of marginal VFR and scattered IFR, as well as VFR over the interior all the way down to Kodiak Island. Mostly VFR there, and then marginal VFR for the Panhandle. And the afternoon Wednesday, IFR along the border there, the Panhandle, otherwise marginal, up into Yakutat over to Cape Yakataga, Cape St. Elias area, northward, eastern Copper River Basin. VFR now, northern Cook Inlet, Matanuska, Susitna Valley, northward there to the Brooks Range. Some IFR, northern Bering Sea, Norton Sound, Yukon Delta, Seward Peninsula, into the Kobuk Valley, and marginal and IFR conditions, western Arctic coast, central and eastern coast there, VFR, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, VFR, southern Kuskokwim Valley, IFR, Alaska Peninsula, to Amchitka, marginal VFR for both Anatuvik and Anigan for the day on Tuesday, VFR, Lake Clark and Merrill, rainy, starting out marginal, becomes VFR, and windy, looks like occasional IFR, either approach. Isabel, same forecast, IFR in either entrance. Mentasta, marginal. Tanita, IFR. And Portage, IFR as well. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 to 6,000 feet there from southern Panhandle to the Queen Charlottes, and at the surface just off the North Gulf Coast, east side of Kodiak Island, cuts across the western Alaska Peninsula, back south of the Pribilofs now, and staying well north of the Aleutians. Icing, areas of isolated moderate rime or mixed icing over most areas of interior Alaska, heavier icing down toward the southern southeast coast and maybe out west of the Pribilofs, and just a little bit of an icing, mixed icing possibility there for the entire Aleutian chain, Alaska Peninsula, but not too great of a threat. And for the jet stream, westerlies up to 150 knots, western Aleutian southwest Bering, drops off to about 80 to 85 knots across Fox Islands, southwest 90 knots across the central southern Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, west-northwest, 50 to 60 knots there along the southwest coast to cutting across Kodiak Island, 45 knots western Alaska range, 3,000 feet, 45 to 60 knot winds across the Bering Sea from the west generally, and 60 knot northwest winds across the Barren Islands from the Kamishak Gap, and southwest or westerlies 35 to 40 knots into the Panhandle and the western Arctic coast. And turbulence-wise, I probably would have thrown some on the western Arctic coast there, and otherwise considerable moderate there for Kodiak Islands, southwest interior, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Panhandle, and up along the eastern interior there, Alaska Range to the Yukon River.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska.
Wow.
and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower.
Yeah.
It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now, the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a a constant frame of reference,
Right.
and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at GINA, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at the coastal water forecast along the central and south coast of the Panhandle, west winds tomorrow 30 knots and seas up to 14 feet. North coast, southwest 25 knots, 15-foot seas. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay. Actually, all of the inside waters have small craft advisories going southeast 25 knots for Clarence Strait, south 25 knots for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal. Gale force gusts around Stevens Passage. And looking ahead to the day on, Wednesday, that's the next day. Gale warnings, south coast of the Panhandle, west winds 35 knots, seas around 20 feet, and then north central coast, west at 30 knots, and then much lighter winds on the north coast up there, 20 knots out of the west, but seas still as high as 18 feet. Small craft advisories, northern inner channels, winds on average northwest at 25 knots, much lighter for Stevens Passage and more variable, call it south at 10 with slight seas, and Clarence Strait, southwest winds 20 knots. Prince William Sound, gale warnings for the day Tuesday, northwest 35 knots, seas up to 9 feet, and storm warnings for the North Gulf Coast, west-southwest 45 to 50 knots, seas over 20 feet, and storm warnings for the Barren Islands. West winds 50, gusting 60 knots, seas around 20 feet. Storm warnings also for Chemishak Bay, west at 50 knots, 15-foot seas. Southern Cook Inlet, good gales. 40-knot winds out of the west with 10-foot seas. Cut that in half for Northern Cook Inlet, west at 20 knots. And for Wednesday, much lighter winds back to the northeast, kind of a typical winter pattern for Northern Cook Inlet, northeast at 10 knots, north 15, south of the Forelands. Winds northwest coming down to 30 knots for Chemishak Bay. Minimum gales hold on to the Barren Islands out of the west at 35. And for the North Gulf Coast, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, seas around 14 feet, and north winds at 20 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, gale warnings. West winds 35 to 40 knots. Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, gale warnings. West winds 35 to 40 knots. And the Bering Sea side, small craft advisories, west winds 30 knots. That same forecast good for Bristol Bay. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay on Wednesday, southwest 35 knots. Alaska Peninsula, southwest 45 knots. And Kodiak Island, west winds 30 to 35 knots with seas 11 to 15 feet. Fox Islands, mostly west winds at 30 knots tomorrow. Adak and Atka, southwest 30 to 35 knots. Gale warnings around Chitka Island to Shimia for southwest winds 35 knots. And for the day on Wednesday, Gale warnings, Shimia to Kiska, northwest 40 knots. Storm warnings from Amchitka Island eastward to Unalaska Island, actually, for west-southwest winds, 50 to 55 knots, and seas running anywhere from 23 to 30 feet. Southwest coast tomorrow, west winds 25 to 30 knots. Pribilofs west 30, St. Matthew Island south at 30, St. Lawrence Island much lighter, northwest at 20 knots, and Norton Sound west at 15. Northeast 30 for St. Lawrence Island on Wednesday, and gales along the southwest coast, west-southwest 35 knots. Gales also for the Pribilofs west at 45 knots, and St. Matthew Island west-northwest, let's see, what was that? Northwest at 40 knots, seas 22 feet. West winds at 15 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast on Tuesday. Central coast, southwest at 20. Western Beaufort Sea or western Arctic coast there, south at 30 knots. Brisk wind advisory is actually western Arctic coast all the way down to Wales for 30-knot winds out of the northwest. And then those drop off markedly there from Wales to Cape Thompson, northwest 15 on Wednesday, just 20-knot westerlies there, Point Hope to Cape Lisburne. Western Arctic coast, western central Arctic coast, brisk wind advisory, southwest 25 knots. Brisk wind advisory, far eastern Arctic coast there, Kaktovik, Barter Island, demarcation point, for westerlies at 25 knots. And for tonight, blowing snow continues to diminish. That low weakens and drifts off to the northeast, so that's going to kind of keep it breezy and snowy, but nothing like you've seen over the last 36 hours. And snow showers starting to scatter out over the western interior. Snow moves into south central Alaska. Winter storm warnings on their way out over the interior. And snow moves into the Panhandle, especially the Juneau area. Winter storm warning there. North Gulf Coast. High wind warning for the eastern Alaska Range continues, and snow advisories. Anchorage for 3 to 8 inches of snow, and snow and blowing snow develops again as colder air pushes down across the southeast Bering and Alaska Peninsula. Tuesday, Wednesday, next system moves into the southwest.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.